Welcome to Citizen University TV. I'm Eric Liu. On this show, we look at strategies of citizen power, ways that you can affect change at the level of the community or our country. Over the course of our show, we've been looking at strategies in a few different categories: changing the game of power, changing the story of power, and changing the equation of power. Today, we're going to go deeper in an element of changing the story, a strategy that we call organizing in narratives. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, in the first place, that so much of civic power, so much of politics, is about the stories we tell about ourselves, about those who are our adversaries, and that your ability to organize people so much depends on your ability to find a crystallizing, catalyzing narrative that brings people on board. There are three elements to this strategy. The first one is defining the us in play. Who is us? Who's on our side? The second is looking at power stories, ways in which a sense of how things got to be this way, why things are this way, and how things could change all gets capitalized and wrapped into an arc of narrative. And finally, the idea of activating the hero spirit in every citizen and a belief that they can make change, that you can make change. Well, let's start with this question, who is us? In some ways, this is the elemental question of all politics. Who's us? How do we define us when we think about us and them? Sometimes that's about party, sometimes it's about geography, sometimes it's about ethnicity. But whatever the issue is and whatever the context is, you start with a given us. And the game of politics and civic life is always trying to expand that circle, expand the number of folks who think about themselves as being part of your group, your tribe, your team. So let's think about an issue just in the life of Seattle. Say you live in a neighborhood of single-family homes, and the question on the table is, should we allow more density? Or maybe the question on the table is, should we allow a homeless encampment or a homeless shelter in our bucolic little neighborhood? If you're on the side that says, yes, we ought to, you've got to think about telling a story of who we are as a neighborhood that helps bring other folks into that fold. And that story's got to be about inclusivity and the better angels of our nature. Maybe sometimes that story will be about shaming folks who don't want to let other people into the neighborhood. But if you're on the other side of that debate, and you're thinking, no, we've got a story here to tell about what's special and unique about our neighborhood, what needs to be preserved, and that the way we bring folks into our fold here is to get them to believe that what brought them here to this neighborhood is preserving the special, unique, very fleeting character of a sense of place. All of this is about defining us in our politics. The organizer Marshall Gans, a great teacher and practitioner who's been doing this work ever since the 1960s, when he was organizing for the United Farm Workers. A few decades later, helped Barack Obama organize his incredible grassroots army in 2008. Marshall Gans talks about there being three nested stories in community organizing: a story of self, a story of us, and a story of now. And at the heart of that arc is the story of us, figuring out how you get people to go out of their selfish sense of personal identity to a deeper sense of collective purpose. In the United States right now, you think about the changing face and voice of our country, and that's not just about increasing diversity and the demographic shifts that immigration and racial change have brought, but it's also the ways in which economic inequality and concentration of wealth are stretching apart our social fabric and our sense of us. So much of our politics today is about contesting and redefining, for purposes of winning victories, this notion of us. Well, that brings us then to the second element of organizing in narratives, and that's what we call power stories. This idea that in so much of politics, your ability to move people depends on your ability to tell a story about how there once was a great paradise where things were working, where things were aligned, where values and interests were all oriented in the same way and things worked for people, but then how that paradise got lost, how it was betrayed, how all those great fruits of that previous paradise were eliminated here. And then finally, how you, by joining me, can actually redeem this paradise and return us to the state that we once had and can have again. That flow, as simple and mythic as it sounds, is at the heart of so much effective political organizing, again, at the local and national level. You think about Donald Trump and his campaign in 2016. What was his slogan? What was his campaign except a story of paradise, paradise lost, and a promise now of paradise redeemed? The very idea of Make America Great Again is one of these arcs of backward-looking but also future-promising stories of paradise. You think about life in our rapidly changing city right now with gentrification, neighborhoods like the International District, the Central District, Columbia City, where communities of color have been displaced and pushed out, where affordability is the issue. For a lot of those organizers trying to hang on and preserve a sense of diversity and the original character of these neighborhoods, so much of the fight is about telling the story about a paradise that used to exist, a paradise that's been lost by this rapid, reckless change, and a paradise that can be redeemed by organizing, by the mobilizing of community power. Again, so much of these stories are in the background, but when you think about what makes things work, whether it's for Trump or whether for neighborhood activists here in Seattle, you begin to see the ways in which these narratives pop out. Well, then the next and final element of organizing in narratives is this notion of heroes in real life. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean quite simply that everybody wants to be the hero of their own story. This is human nature. And when we want to be the hero of our own story, we want to respond to leaders, activists, organizers who can tell a story that makes us step into that role of the hero, of the change maker, of the redeemer. There's a great organization called the Harry Potter Alliance, founded by a young activist named Andrew Slack, which capitalized on this simple insight. And he said, let's take this structure of the Harry Potter novels, this mythic structure that's in so much of our popular culture, and let's activate the fans and the readers of Harry Potter to think of themselves as what he calls heroes in real life, to imagine themselves stepping into this role to be defenders of LGBTQ communities, to fight genocide in Darfur, to think about ways in which they can be defenders of immigrants here in the United States. They've got a campaign right now called Neville Fights Back, hashtag Neville Fights Back, in which people who are fans of Harry Potter are invited to reimagine themselves in the character of Neville, fighting against, in this case, not the characters from Harry Potter, but fighting against the forces that are trying to undermine the Paris Agreement, that are trying to deny climate change. Neville Fights Back is just one simple way of activating, particularly among a younger generation, the sense that, hey, I can be a hero too if I start showing up in civic life, if I start doing that in the company of others and organizing collectively to make change. Another one of the Harry Potter Alliance's campaigns, which tapped a different vein of popular culture, was called Superman is an Immigrant, which is so simple and is true. In fact, if you want to take it literally, Superman is an undocumented immigrant. He's here without papers. And they were able to take that notion and say, you know what, let's empathize, let's humanize. When we think about undocumented Americans, when you think about people who are called illegals, what you're talking about is Superman. What you're talking about is a hero. And there's a way in which everybody has an immigration story in this country and a way in which they can activate that heroic spirit. The Harry Potter Alliance is really good at tapping into other things like this, whether it's Superman, whether it's Harry Potter itself, other things, Star Wars. They've used this material of popular culture to capture this spirit and this yearning of people to be part of their own great story. More recently in civic life, this fellow here, who you may remember, a guy named Khizr Khan, who is a member of what we think of as Gold Star families, families here in the United States who've lost a loved one in combat and in war. And Khizr Khan, during the Democratic Convention in 2016, went up there as a Gold Star father with incredible moral authority, talking not only about the hero who was his lost son, who died in Iraq, but talking about his notion as an immigrant, as a believer in the United States Constitution, that it was his role, that it was every viewer's role to claim the Constitution, to claim a sense of connection to the heroes who've given their lives in defense of the Constitution. That wasn't just a technical defense of what was going on in politics. That wasn't just a technical critique of those who were nativist or anti-immigrant. It was trying to, again, awaken this heroic spirit. Well, these notions of organizing in narratives and the ways that you think about all of these strategies, they play out here in our life and in our community here in Seattle. Let's look at one particular story about immigrants, food, and the changing nature of culture and power here in Seattle.